are building a Tiger 1 tank for RC the hard way. Yeah, we're kit bashing with parts from Heng Long, RC Tank Legion, Motto, Clark, and Taigen tanks. Hi, my name is Doug. Welcome to episode number 3. I went over to Hobby Lobby and picked up one of these little cases for like $4 or so. And you can see here I'm keeping old parts from some Heng Long tanks past and some new parts. So I'm going to be doing some picking to put some of these old and new parts together. You can see I've got some buckets here, these really cool bushings from RC Tank Legion. And you'll see some little plastic parts here right in this little corner spot. We're going to pull some of those things out and use them sooner or later. Well, if you're anything like me and you like to do super detailing, I need little screws from time to time to put in the hull or other places to just give that little extra spark of realism. And these tiny screws are hard to find, but these are available on eBay. This little wheel of screws goes for about $8 to $12 online. Well, do you notice that we've spent quite a bit of time in the rear end of the tank working on the FIFO air cleaners, working on the exhaust systems, and these manifold hoses need a little bit of work to operate well. The original hoses on the Tiger 1 were actually corrugated metal, very hard to replicate. So the best ones I found so far are the cloth hoses from Taigen. And you can get I believe for like $4 online. Now, using these old tubes from a previous Heng Long tank, I split it down the middle, then you curl it up real tight, cut it off to size. That's to make sure that you can stick it on both ends and be able to glue it into place. Now, here's what I'm using to curl it. Take a look at this little screwdriver. Just roll it between your fingers because you want it to be smaller than the diameter of the hose you're sticking it into. Now watch, we're just going to slide it into place. Why would we be doing such a strange thing? Well, if you put just the cloth hoses in there, whenever you remove this thing, or you even try to just make it look like it's the real thing, they tend to crimp and fold. Put a little bit of rubber hose on the inside and look, it bends very nicely. Just a nice little detail here. In a previous episode, we put magnets on the end of these air cleaner hoses so they fit right into place, but they pull off easily. Now you're going to want to put some glue on the inside. Be real liberal with that glue. Just twist it into place. And then you're going to first want to stick it on the manifold side and then on this little tube here. And make sure you glue both sides because it does take a little while to stick. And I do recommend using some of that kicker. That's the Zap-A-Gap kicker that makes this stuff just freeze up and stay in position, because you'll be holding this for a long time if you don't. Just a little spritz will do it. Wait a few seconds and you're good to go. I borrowed this little footing from a Heng Long tank of years past, and we're going to use this one on the new tank. It is replicated in plastic, so you're going to want to put a little bit of glue on that and do a little twist motion as you put it on. Now remember, it takes a little while to set when you're using plastic with a fabric, so a good spritz will do it. Now make sure when you put this little plastic part on the inside, you're going to have to cut it just a little bit short or the hose just won't fit. Take the inner hose and do that little roll and number with your fingers. You want to make sure that it's a little bit smaller than the diameter of the tube. Just stick it on in. Boy, that really works well, doesn't it? You're going to try to slide it through. Use a screwdriver to pull it up, make it just a little bit easier. And remember, I would use these hoses at full length instead of cutting them off. It'll help when you remove the upper hull later on. Again, remember to use your kicker. It's from Zap-A-Gap, and I believe there are some other makers of exactly the same stuff. But it is going to speed up your build process because you can just sit and hold and hold and hold. Also, it keeps that glue from sticking to your fingers. Now, here it is in place. You can see it actually works really well. The magnets will hold, and as you put the hull into place, just adjust your hoses, and you are good to go. In 1943, when these tanks first hit the field, they did notice that there were some breakage issues with the transmission. It was just a weak part of the hull. So these little supports then started being put in the field and also at the factory. So this detail is the late part of the early tanks, or more mid-production of these tanks. And again, we use spritz, and it does take a while for this stuff to set up if you don't use it. So I really recommend it. On the left side, we're doing the same thing. I just really like the way these look. It just adds a little bit of detail down there where there really isn't a whole lot. I'm not sure if I'm going to put the extra tracks on the front there. They tend to pick up junk when you're driving them around. It all depends on what model, which tank that we're going to be building and painting later on. Here's a detail of this tank that I have been thinking about for a few weeks here. Just exactly how are we going to fit everything into place? It is a big tank, but the internals are bigger. So we've got to make sure that we have a real efficient way of putting all the parts in and everything still works. Now the big culprit is the speaker that we want to put in. Now the Clark amplifier really has a good sound when you hook it up with a good speaker. So I have this FRS-8 and this FRS-58 speaker. One is, of course, larger than the other one. Guess which one I want to use? The larger of the two, right? So I've got to figure out some way to fit it in the rear of this tank and still allow for the smoke machine to be there. And if you make the hoses too long in the smoke machine, it has a rough time pushing them out through the exhaust. So I'll have to get creative with this. Now you notice as I have the TK40 board laid out and also the receiver, I'm going to place a block of tape around these main parts here just to make sure that I don't cross over into the area that I need. Now we could do this a lot more sophisticated if we were going to use CAD, and I had all of these different parts put on the computer and we could put those into place, but right now we're using a different kind of CAD. It's computer aided design turned into cardboard aided design. That's probably the way they designed the Tiger 1 back in the 30s anyway. Get yourself some index cards that have a little bit of thickness to them, and you can use them to develop templates so you can cut styrene in different parts, and they will fit perfectly when you put them into place. Now, I always make sure that I use a little bit of drafting tools there too. You see I have a triangle, and I also have a few other little drafting tools that are going to assist me in making sure the lines are always square with each other, or at least really close. Here's the little template that I'm putting into place. You can see it fits. Now I'm going to take a pen and I'm going to scribe along the side. And I'm going to cut it with a knife. And after that, I'm going to have something that is going to be suitable to be able to cut some styrene. And that'll form the basis of the speaker box and the left and right side. So you see it's got some clearance and it works. We're going to use this 3mm thick styrene. One thing you can really do to help your construction is if you have one of these really large cutting boards, which I highly recommend, they always have these grid patterns underneath. Now it doesn't matter whether it's in millimeters or inches. Basically, you're going to use those just to keep yourself honest when you're making the cuts. For instance, you see it has X and Y. We're going to cut and make sure that our tools are right on those X and Y's, and also the pattern that we're using. It's going to save you a lot of heartache in the future. Cut styrene, very simple. You just score it and then just snap it off like that. You might have some ragged edges, but we're going to go back later and just run a little bit of sandpaper over it, and it'll be just perfect to be able to glue up. If you have a real small part that is just too hard to crack off, you can use a tool, but use it on the part you're not going to use because it will make a mark. Now here's the sandpaper. I'm using 220 and just put it on a flat surface. Very important to use the tabletop to your benefit. Go back and forth with it just to give yourself a nice square surface to glue on. As I put this first piece of styrene into the bottom of the tank, some little screws are sticking up in the bottom. I want to use these to be able to index this box so I always know it's in the right spot. As I push down, you can see it made a little indentation. Let's grab my Ryobi drill set, and we're going to drill a little hole right where these little indents are. And you'll see in just a few minutes, as we get this together, it's going to index this box perfectly when we put it into place. Look, here's a little test foot. Oh, pat yourself on the back. We did just fine. Grab some masking tape now because we're going to glue using the sides of our tank as a guide, but we don't want the glue to get on the sides because that would be ugly, right? We got to make sure we look like we are excellent craftsmen. So I put tape on the side here so the glue will stick only to the part. Let's put the base back into position. I'm going to put my part into place with my little indexed screws there, as you can see. I think I'll just put the speaker into place just to keep myself honest. Now I have cut all of the side parts and the top part now, and it's time to glue into place. You want to make sure you liberally put glue on there. I do recommend gel glue if you have it. This is a little runnier than I would like, but if it does tend to run onto your plastic parts, you can always go back later and sand it, and I'll show you what that looks like when you do it. We'll end up with a very nice, crisp box. These small parts that I'm putting in now are just reinforcements for the box to make sure it stands really square. I'm not really sure we needed them, but this thing is going to be a nice, sturdy little thing. And one thing about a speaker enclosure, the stronger the box, the more efficient the speaker enclosure is going to be. And that is because when the speaker vibrates, it transmitted into sound energy or whether it's into heat energy. Sometimes depends on how strong that box is. Let's make it as strong as we can. Ah, there we go. So this thing fits back into place where it's supposed to be, and also it looks pretty decent. You know, I use computer-aided design all day at work, and when I come home at the end, it's kind of nice to do something very rudimentary with my hands, the way they used to do it, the way real men used to build things. So we're going back at making templates again. You can see all I did was I just put this cardboard up against the existing geometry that we've been putting together, and you just run a pen along the outside and cut it. And you notice I'm lining it up with that grid that's on my cutting board. Remember, that kind of behavior keeps us honest when we're building things. If the template fits, you can be very confident that whatever you cut out of the styrene is going to fit too. Sometimes you have to take the thickness of the material into the back of your mind when you're cutting these templates to allow for that. But say you cut it too large, hey, you can always go back in like I'm doing right here, and I'm allowing for the thickness of the material and then using my pliers to cut out the material that's not needed. See how it dimples the material? Yeah, you really don't want to use those parts that you yank off this way. And to clean up a little bit of this hash that's left over from snapping off the part, you just take a little blade or sandpaper to get it nice and squared up. Here we put on the cyanoacrylate, and as you slide it into the proper position and you spray it, wow, look, it looks great. Now see, by building this speaker enclosure the way we're building it, we can fool everybody into thinking, hey, we know what we're doing. But actually, we're just doing it by the seat of the pants. And remember, you might make mistakes here or there, but this is a very forgiving material. If you cut it too short, you cut yourself another part. And if it's just perfect or just slightly off, you can trim it, you can sand it, you can fill it, whatever you want to do. So here's this odd-shaped box, and remember the reason we're doing that is we're trying to allow a little area, a little lip of area for the smoke servo to be able to fit right on the side there to make sure that the hull has enough clearance when you put it on the lower hull. So far, so good. What I haven't showed you is I used a disc sander to sand the sides smoother to make it look like a real nice crisp box. Let's zoom in and I'll show you how the indexing works and why it's important. It just snaps down right where those little screws are. Perfect. Well, I thought it was perfect, but the enclosure turns out to be a little bit too big. Look, it kind of crowds the battery. And in the back, the fastener that keeps on the upper hull would be smashing into the speaker, which we don't want. So it looks like we'll have to go with the smaller speaker and smaller enclosure after all, and I'll show you that next week. Whenever you're creating a historic vehicle, I always recommend having lots of photographs, and I found that expanded metal was used on Tiger 131 at the Bovington Museum in England So I just happened to have some scraps of this miniature expanded aluminum, and we'll use it to super detail this Tiger 1. Again, I'll use my drafting tools in a crude way, but it's very effective. I take a little bit of this material that looks like it will fit in the area, and then I literally take a number 11 X-Acto blade and just very lightly I'll run across and score this expanded metal, and it breaks off very easily. And now this little rectangle will fit perfectly into place. You see those little things that look like screws up at the top? Those are actually fuel fillers. The German soldiers would have a tool that almost looked a little like a Phillips screwdriver before they existed, and that's what they would use to open up those fillers. Since we're going to be priming and painting anyway, we can mark right on the surface using a permanent marker to indicate where we should cut. And we'll just go back and we'll prime this expanded metal and then paint it, and it'll look like it was meant to be there all along. Remember, what they had done is they welded it on the corners on the original tank. We're going to sort of weld it by using some cyanoacrylate and some kicker, and it works really nicely. Again, just put a whole bunch of glue here, and remember, it's pretty forgiving. This is the part where you subscribe, and hey, give us a like if you want. We'll catch you next time.